Welcome everybody to day 1 of 12 days of anime. Today we're going to talk about Dr. Stone, but we're not just going to talk about Dr. Stone. We're going to review the entire season of the anime, which ended today by the time I'm making this video, though you will probably be seeing this video 1 or 2 days later. Now this season has been absolutely amazing, and I think we really need to start off quite smooth. So we're going to talk about the soundtrack first of all, because the soundtrack on Dr. Stone has been absolutely great in my opinion. It really fits the story. In a way I really didn't think it would, but after seeing, the entire season, all 24 episodes of Dr. Stone, it really shows that this soundtrack was made for this series. Now it really depicts everything that is Dr. Stone, it radiates with these elements of triumph, the scientific advancements that Senku makes along the way, and you can really tell because the placement of the soundtracks, the direction of everything in terms of sound and audio, it is absolutely great. It is just stunning. But if you go into the story, let's talk about the prologue. That is the first sort of 6 or so episodes of the anime where we have Yuzuriha, we have Taiju, Senku, and Tsukasa. Now this is obviously a part of the story that's kind of slow, and it's just sort of setting the theme of the series, right? Like we really find out what's going to happen in terms of the future of the series, and I really think this was done quite well in the anime, though I definitely think this part of the story was not quite as good in the anime as opposed to the manga. But it wasn't bad by any means, it just wasn't really that interesting to go through these first couple of episodes, which is why I think a lot of people may drop the series before we actually get to the good stuff. And this was the case with a lot of people in the manga as well, which I do remember, by the way, because I know a lot of people said that the story was quite boring at the beginning, which is probably because they didn't really get to the good shit, because they just couldn't get to that part before they got too bored of it, right? But if you actually get past that, if you go through this prologue, which is obviously Taiju, Yuzuriha, Senku, and Tsukasa. Now these people are supposedly the main cast, at the beginning at least, though Tsukasa definitely grows to become more of an antagonist as opposed to part of the main cast, but that doesn't really happen until they separate. Now before that, you get some really cool interactions between everyone, and you obviously have this whole romance setting between Yuzuriha and Taiju, but Taiju doesn't really want to confess his feelings after they depetrify because he wants to find the right moment. And this is something that's really been built up even in the manga up until this day. This is something that I'm pretty sure is going to be at the end of the story. I think this is something we're going to be seeing way further down the line. Now Senku obviously has more of a connection with Tsukasa in the sense that their ideologies clash tremendously. Now that is something that really sparks this story, because obviously Senku kind of dies, spoiler, but he gets revived, so he's not really dead, he just dies temporarily. Thanks to the petrification elements of this story, he's able to be revived and be in perfect health. And that is obviously when the story kind of takes off, because that is when Senku separates from Taiju and Yuzuriha. They go to become these sort of double agents for Senku at Tsukasa's Empire. And at that point, the story really takes off, which is my favorite part of Dr. Stone, the village arc. It's to this day, it is my favorite part of the manga. And the anime did this part really well in my opinion. So let's talk about the village arc a little bit, because that is really when we get to be introduced to a lot of good characters. We have one of the greatest storylines in current Jump, and the anime did this perfect justice in my opinion. Now what's really interesting about the village arc is, despite the fact that we have quite a few characters that are introduced over time, each and every one serves a purpose. None of them are really being left out, and they're all kind of contributing in some way. And that is something that I really gotta give Inagaki props to, the author of Dr. Stone. He really wrote these characters in a way where, every time they're on screen, you feel like everything they're doing has a purpose and they're never being thrown to the side like a lot of other mangas, especially right now. The side casts are being underutilized, but with Dr. Stone you have a lot of characters and they're doing something every time you see them. Whatever they're doing, it could be something really mundane, but it is something that's going to serve a big purpose in the long run. Like even if they're just helping out with copper wires, that is something that's going to play a big role in terms of the scientific element of the story, and that is something that I really liked. And when you look at the female aspect of Dr. Stone, a lot of female characters in Jump or in manga in general, let's be honest, especially shonen, they don't really get utilized as much as you'd like. But with Dr. Stone, female characters and male characters alike get the justice they deserve. They definitely get utilized, they have a purpose, they do something, they're helpful, I think a great example of this would be Suika from Dr. Stone, and she really does a really good job at being helpful. And she's a really good example because when she's introduced, she just wants to help out, and Senku invites her to help out. Despite she's a child, she can't really do heavy heavy lifting or anything, but he finds something that Suika can do. And that is something that really caught my attention when reading the manga, and this is especially well showcased in the anime as well. They don't really make this any less noticeable. In fact, I think they probably make it more noticeable if anything. This was really well portrayed in the anime. And Suika's character in general was something that really stood out to me in the anime as opposed to the manga. I mean, she's a great character in the manga as well, but in the anime, she really stands out in a completely different sense. And I'm gonna get into some characters that stand out soon. But yeah, I just wanted to really point out that there are some female characters that really stand out even above some male characters. That is something that I really like about Dr. Stone when it comes to the balance of how characters are being utilized. Instead of just having all of the male characters at the center of attention and the females being sort of support or just on the sidelines all the time. Now, as I said, there are some main cast characters that really stand out to me in the anime as opposed to the manga, though not to say that they don't stand out in the manga, but in the anime they really radiated in a different way altogether. These characters are Suika, Gen, and Kazuki. Now I'm gonna start with Kazuki because Kazuki is the one that surprised me the most, and that's because now in the manga he was, much like in the anime, just a guy who was really good at crafting, you know, but he didn't really feel like he was doing that much on screen. On the other hand, when I was watching the anime, Kazuki really felt like he was doing something all the time. You know, he really got more personality altogether, and I really enjoyed seeing that as well because he's one of the male characters that really felt like he was being left out in the manga, especially at that part of the story. Like in the manga right now, he's definitely being more utilized, but at the time, he really wasn't really feeling like he was contributing, or at least that he was given the same amount of focus as say Chrome or Gen or Kinro, you know. He really felt like he was being kind of on the sideline as a male character, and he was only being put in whenever he was needed, whereas in the anime, he was around all the time. It actually felt like it was a lot more of an actual character than in the manga. Now, I already went into Suika, like she's really someone that stands out as opposed to the manga because she is, I mean, she's supposed to be this really hyperactive little girl, like she just moves around all the time, and the anime really made it so that you can really tell what this character is about. Now, how hyperactive she just moves around all the time. She wants to help out, you know, she scutters along all over the place, you know, she rolls around in her little melon helmet. This is something that just couldn't be as well portrayed in the manga, I think, and the anime really elevated that to an entirely different level. So it wasn't necessarily to do with how she was written, because that was already really well done in the manga. Instead, they just used the format of anime to really elevate what her character was supposed to be, and that is something that I think a lot of people can agree with me when I say that it was fantastically done. Now with Gen, he's more of an expressive character, right? Like in terms of writing, again, he wasn't really improved because he was already really good in the manga. In fact, he's my favorite character in Dr. Stone. But the way he was introduced and showcased in the anime, you know, with his expressive nature and his magic tricks and all of this stuff that he brings to the table, it really showed us that there are a lot of different types of characters in Dr. Stone, and not just because everyone is super expressive and really Senku-like, you know, they're not the same character, you know, they still have very different personalities, very different views on anything really. And Gen is a pretty good example of that. Like, he is someone who's not picking sides, you know, he's someone that isn't really afraid to tell you what he thinks on the matter. Like, he will tell you straight up what he wants to tell you. Like with the whole thing of him joining Tsukasa or joining Senku, he told Senku like to his face that he is going to back the winning horse no matter who ends up on top. Like, he is not afraid to betray Senku if Senku fell short. Now ultimately, as we already know, that didn't really happen because he ended up joining Senku because Senku was able to persuade him that science is the way that Gen wants to live. Like, he could not resist a bottle of Coke, and a Coke was enough to persuade him. Like, yeah, there may be a bit more work in the kingdom of science, but the rewards are definitely worth it. Now, one thing that really caught my attention, and it caught my attention for the wrong reasons, is the Byakuya backstory, you know, Senku's stepdad going into space. The reason why this caught my attention for the wrong reason reasons is because the animation of these episodes, or episode, I don't remember if it was 1 or 2 episodes, they really felt clunky and just choppy. I don't really know if it's just me, but it really felt like they were not quite as well done as the rest of the show. Like maybe they had some issues figuring out how to animate people in space and zero gravity and all of that, you know, that might have been a big issue for TMS Entertainment. I'm not quite sure, but it really did feel like, you know, there was something different about these episodes in a slightly negative way, I'll be honest with you. And it's a shame because that part of the story is actually one of my favorite parts of Dr. Stone, yet the anime did not quite live up to my expectations. Though I will say this, there's a possibility that the Blu-ray release will make that better. Now let's talk about the Tsukasa Empire, because that's obviously a really big deal in Dr. Stone, especially right now that we have the Kingdom of Science led by Senku, who are just advancing and advancing. You know, we need to kind of talk about, you know, what's going on with Tsukasa's Empire, because we have had a little bit of that this season, though the climax is obviously coming in season 2, which has been confirmed, by the way. Thank God for that, because I was really hoping that we would get a season 2 announcement, and alas we did, so that's great. But anyway, Tsukasa Empire, now this is a part of the story that is really important, but we don't really see enough of it in my opinion, at least not at the beginning. Like we don't really see just how they progress and how everyone is being depetrified and who everyone is up until we are introduced to them. I'm not gonna get too much into that because obviously we haven't really had much names. Like we've had Hyoga and we've had Homura, obviously Tsukasa again, but these are really the only characters as far as I know that we have found out names of in the anime so far. And you know, these characters are pretty good characters, especially for what they are supposed to provide the story. It hasn't really been too much different from the manga because, you know, in the manga we also didn't really get to see much from them, though the one thing that the anime did differently, I feel like, is they've teased them a little bit more than the manga did. Like we've seen some of them, you know, in silhouettes or just brief shots of them. You know, you don't know who they are, but you can probably imagine they're gonna bring some significance whenever their role needs them to, right? Like there's no way to really show them they're not gonna be important at some point. And I think this was a really good thing for the anime because it really helps people be more intrigued, and it really pushes the idea that people may want season 2 and they can't wait to see what happens next, whether they jump on the manga or they wait for season 2. You know, I'm sure there's gonna be a mix between the two, right? Like I really hope a lot of people jump on the manga because the manga is great and you should read it. But if you do enjoy the anime for what it is, you know, you do you and you wait for season 2, because like I've been saying in this review, the anime is fantastic as an adaptation. Obviously towards the end of the final episode, which came out today by the time I'm making this video at least, we got a glimpse of, you know, Taiju and Yuzuri again, which we haven't really seen for a long time now, and I'm sure a lot of people are really hyped getting to see the two again, and trust me, you're gonna get a lot more in season 2. Again, this is a really interesting part to end the story at for season 1 because it really reminds people that these characters are there and they're not forgotten and they're not going to be thrown away just to let Senku have all of the spotlight, although Senku is the main character, so of course he's gonna have a lot of spotlight. That's just how it is. Speaking of Senku, let's talk about him because I just realized I haven't talked about Senku much at all in this review. I think it's about time we mention the main character. So the main character in Dr. Stone is someone that is very smart. Like this guy is super clever. Not only did he count continuously for over 3 millennia, but he also managed to survive on his own despite having like no good physique. You know, he was able to survive by sheer willpower pretty much, and he was able to build somewhat of a home before Taiju came around. And whenever he moved on to, you know, the Ishigami village, of course, you have him really persuade a lot of people that science is a good thing. A lot of people were very drawn back by this because, you know, to them it would just seem like sorcery, and who can blame them? But Senku, he's a character that is capable of shining a light on the topic of science. He can make science interesting to a lot of people, even to viewers. Like if you're a viewer, you are interested by the science brought to you by Dr. Stone, and Senku is a really good teacher of that, even if it's just like surface level science, right? Like even if it's not something that you can really use in real life. Though there was this one thing that I found really interesting about the science of Dr. Stone, because I've seen a lot of videos of people making this Senku Cola on YouTube, and I think that's a really good thing because that really shows you that people do care about the science shown in Dr. Stone's anime. And to that, we just have to give both Senku and the writer of Dr. Stone props, because they're the ones responsible for such endeavors. Now, speaking about the science in Dr. Stone, let's talk about the science exposition, because this is something that really amazed me with the anime as opposed to the manga. Okay, so when you have Senku or anyone to like explain the science that goes on whenever they're making something in the series, you really see how you get these charts and you see step-by-step tutorials on how to make everything. You gotta do this and you gotta do that and that and that, right? Until you get to the final stage, sort of like the goal stage, if you will. And this is something that I found to be much more interesting in the anime as opposed to the manga, because in the manga you get like a whole page of just these steps, right? Kind of like the same as in the anime, but it's just a big page of text with a bunch of steps on it, and it can be a bit overwhelming to read all of that in one go, whereas in the anime it becomes a lot more interesting because you get one step and you obviously read the subtitles, or if you're watching the W's, listen, and you have them explain it to you in a much more, I guess, engaging way. And that is something that I think the anime for Dr. Stone really deserve complete props for, because that is one of the best improvements to the series the anime has done as opposed to the manga. Like, there is nothing else that I can say the anime did so much better than the manga did than the science exposition. I don't know if a lot of people agree with me, but this is how I feel personally. It is something that is truly fantastic and a huge step up from the manga, because whenever I read the manga and I get all these big science expositions, I kind of like just zone out and sort of skim through them a bit, because it's so much to read that you just lose interest very quickly if you're not like a super science enthusiast. And while I like science, I'm not like super crazy about it to the point where I would just read literally everything just for the sake of reading it. If it's that much exposition and I'm not gonna understand it anyway, I just kind of zone out and just sort of skim through it a little bit, getting a small grasp of it, right? But I don't really get the full extent probably. Whereas in the anime, I get a lot more insight on it because I can actually follow it a lot more easily. Anyway, I think that's actually all I have for you in regards to the anime of Dr. Stone. I just wanted to give my review on the full season of Dr. Stone because it has just been such a journey. Even though I read the manga, this anime has been such an enjoyable experience to me, and if you're only watching the anime, I can only imagine it must be an even greater experience for you who's never experienced the story before, whereas obviously I have. I just had a really good time re-experiencing it, and let me tell you, it's probably one of my favorite animes this year, even if it is something that I've read before. Anyway, do let me know what you think down below in the comments about Dr. Stone's anime, like how you felt about it, especially if you read the manga, but even if you're only watching the anime, I would like to know what your thoughts are on Dr. Stone as an adaptation or just as a show in general, right? And as always, if you did, be sure to Detroit smash that like button if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. This has been Chaotic Plus, and remember, Toga is waifu, Toga is laifu.